Dr. Michael DeBakey Drake was born on April 21, 1982, in a small town in East Texas. He was named after the world-famous heart surgeon, Dr. Michael DeBakey, by his mother, who worked as a nurse. As a child, he grew up a devout Baptist and dreamed of becoming a worker in the medical profession like his mother and his namesake. His first job was being a janitor at the hospital in his hometown. He later attended Baylor College of Medicine and graduated in 2005, returning immediately to his hometown to work at its hospital. At last, I could make a career for myself here.
That's great. But I can't stay long. Because I am a surgeon specializing in women's health issues, I was just offered a place in Los Angeles. But you can always call on me if there is some issue you think I can handle.
Good luck, Dr. Lee. Dr. Drake then returned to his late mother's Baptist church, only to find it was now led by the Reverend Dave Owen, a hardcore fundamentalist preacher. His extremist views were common among Baptists, but they didn't appeal that much to Dr. Drake. His Christian views were more like those of Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood fame. And over time, Drake would begin to question Reverend Owen's credibility.
Good morning! Take your Bibles and open them to Numbers chapter 31. In this story, God commands Moses and the Israelites to conquer the Midianites, because they worshipped idols and wanted to destroy Israel. Yesterday, one of my flock told me how shocked she was at this story. Isn't genocide evil? She asked.
He's talking about me, Uncle Jesse. Is he going to single me out and condemn me before the rest of the church?
Maybe you should have kept your mouth shut about your doubts, Carla. Brother Dave is already disappointed in us enough for settling that lawsuit over your Bible readings in class.
Here's the thing to remember, though, God is the true source of all that is good, not man. Therefore, man cannot decide for himself what is good or evil, because if he does that he puts himself equal to God. Since God commanded Moses to destroy the Midianites, that act must be seen as good. It only seems evil to modernize because of secular humanism, which dominates our democracy. When man puts himself above God, the result is chaos, because men tend to disagree among themselves, and without a higher authority, nothing can ever be certain or settled. We need a supreme authority to keep corruption and chaos in check, or we all suffer.
I guess that makes sense.
I don't know. Catholics say the Pope should be the supreme authority over the church, but as Protestants we reject it and only follow the Bible. There are so many types of religion already that we seem to be in chaos already.
And yet most of them claim to believe in God too. Dr. Drake always thought of his work in medicine as an expression of his Christianity. So he was troubled when he discovered an actual conflict between his ethical standards as a doctor and the tactics of Reverend Owen. Eventually, it caused them to become enemies.
It is absolutely vital to protect the unborn. There is nothing more vile than killing someone who has no means to defend himself and has such great potential to live a good life. God made that life for a reason and his will must be done.
Are you serious? What about victims of rape or incest who get pregnant? Knowing those acts are themselves horrible, how can a child being produced that way be justified?
Two wrongs don't make a right. Why should an act of rape or incest be followed by an act of murder?
I think I would know more about that issue than you, Reverend Owen.
It's easy for him to talk about the sanctity of human life. He has never been pregnant. But as a cop, I've dealt with a rape victim and the idea of her having her attacker's baby sickens me.
I think I know who you are talking about. And I agree. Exceptions must be made for women and girls who have been violated as a matter of compassion and justice. Pregnancy and childbirth are far more likely to kill a woman than a first-term abortion.
I can't have a baby right now. I'm only 16. My parents will call me a slut for getting myself pregnant, and my now ex-boyfriend says he won't marry me, so I am ruined. I had sex with him because I thought that would keep him with me, but I was wrong.
You were taken advantage of, but you shouldn't be punished for such a mistake. Motherhood shouldn't be a punishment for anything. Maybe I shouldn't do this, but this hospital does occasionally perform abortions for medical reasons. I can tell your mother that you have a severe pelvic infection and then schedule you for an abortion instead. I will keep what was done to you a secret and you will remain safe.
Dr. Drake, you have some explaining to do.
About what, Mrs. Sims?
Did you talk to Brother Dave about Carrie last week?
Yes, I made a prayer request to him. He asked why and I mentioned your daughter's suicide attempt.
That was a serious betrayal of our trust. First of all, Carrie is not even a member of your and Brother Dave's church. Second of all, as an atheist, I have no belief in the usefulness of prayer. And most of all, it should have been me or Lucy talking to Brother Dave about such an issue. Do you want me to show you the highly offensive letter he sent to us?
He did what? I was not expecting him to do that. Feel free to destroy the letter if you do deem it so inappropriate. And you have my profound apologies. Are you trying to get me fired from my hospital? The Sims found out that I was the one who told you of Carrie Sims' suicide attempt. If they sue me over what you did, I'll take you down with me. You were supposed to keep that matter private. I thought as a Christian minister it was my duty to try to bring the gospel to the Sims. That Carrie needed to be saved. Maybe she does, but what you wrote her and her mother's was just insulting. A simple invitation to our church, without mentioning the suicide attempt, would have been far more appropriate and wouldn't have gotten me in trouble.
You are a representative of this Baptist church as well as the Christian faith, and now the Sims think both this church and Christianity are shit because of you. I think you should be fired from this church.
Believing that Reverend Owen's bigoted views were contrary to the actual teachings of Jesus, he took a hard look at the Unitarian Universalist fellowship that had been founded in the town a year earlier, and decided to no longer be Baptist. But instead of joining the UU fellowship, he decided to undermine Reverend Owen's authority from within the church itself. I found out that the Southern Baptist Convention began in 1845 when they rejected a motion against slavery favored by Baptists up north. This was before the Civil War, which ended slavery. By contrast, most Unitarians and Universalists have always been against slavery and the racism that was used to justify it. Don't you think we'd be more loyal to Jesus if we were not members of a church that was part of a racist movement?
You are right. Jesus never condoned slavery, and I don't think he was racist either.
Going to you and telling you about Carrie Sims' suicide attempt was a terrible mistake, one that was indeed a violation of doctor-patient privilege. You're writing the Sims family that letter blasting them could have gotten me sued for malpractice, you idiot. I am thankful the Sims were content to give me a verbal reprimand, but I still admit that I deserved much worse, and so do you. Don't ever betray anyone's trust like that again.
Didn't we already have this argument?
Yes, but the problem is that you don't listen to your critics, thinking you know it all and are good enough. That's arrogance, the polar opposite of the kind of humility Jesus said we must have. And his efforts ultimately succeeded. He and his liberal allies were able to take over the church and oust Reverend Owen. Then he invited the UU Fellowship members to join the church after its mass conversion to Unitarian Universalism.
Dr. Drake, what brings you here? Is there a medical issue I should know about?
No, Mrs. Smith, this is more personal and spiritual in nature.
What do you mean?
It might interest you to know that I am the new president of the Baptist congregation and Miss Jenkins is the new vice president. After the firing of Reverend Owen, the splintered congregation was able to reunite and reorganize itself.
Congratulations. But what does that have to do with me? I was never a member of your church.
True, but you and the Sims couple are the ones who forced us to change. Miss Jenkins, Jason Laker, and I have been telling stories about you, and many of the members of the congregation are curious about your atheist and Unitarian Universalist beliefs and the lesbianism of your friends and even your daughter. Are you and your friends and daughter willing to come speak to us?
I might, assuming you were really willing to listen to us and not judge us like we have had to endure in the past. And we are willing to listen to you in return.
I think we have heard enough from our guests today, so now I, as president of this church, make a formal motion that we as a congregation vote to leave the Southern Baptist Convention and instead join the Unitarian Universalist Association. As you use, most of us can continue to call ourselves Christians if we feel that religion is right for us, but we will no longer shun and scorn atheists and LGBT people. Bigotry is evil no matter what the cause of it, and we should affirm this.
Dr. Drake, as vice president of the church, I second this motion.
Very well.
All in favor of this move, raise your right hand now.
And to our absolute amazement, more than 2/3 of the congregation present voted to join the Unitarian Universalist Association. Suddenly, our UU Fellowship, which had previously only numbered less than a dozen, now numbered more than 100.
Congratulations, Mrs. Smith.
I can't believe this has happened. We never thought an entire church would join with us when we first formed the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship nearly 2 years ago to resist the anti-atheist and anti-LGBT bigotry that dominated this town.
Well, we as a church had to finally face the facts. Under Reverend Owen, an increasing number of our younger members were rejecting the church and leaving it, and without younger members, the church was beginning to die off. Maybe now we can draw some of those young people back. They don't need hypocrisy and bigotry, even if most of us older folks grew up with it. They need love. The kind of love you clearly have for each other and for us. Thank you for showing us a better example of how to live. But that was only the beginning of Dr. Drake's efforts to change his town for the better. He later discovered that allies of Reverend Owen were involved in a scandal that threatened the health of the town's residents, all for the sake of profiting businesses in the area, including the hospital itself. Drake felt guilty after discovering this scandal, and so he fought to help expose it and bring the ones responsible to justice. I don't think suing them is enough. Shouldn't they be facing criminal charges? Isn't destruction of public property a felony that can give you a hard time?
Criminal trials are a lot tougher to prove than civil ones, so we need to make sure the civil trial goes through before we can have my brother and Ted Anderson arrested and imprisoned for what they did. We can't rush this. We have to make sure all our I's are dotted and all our T's are crossed, so to speak.
Unfortunately, he's right. Plus, we know that no matter what we do, the right-wing bigots that dominate the media will spin this into a political stunt done purely to knock Ted Anderson out of the race to become a Texas state senator. Even though his extremist views alone should make him unqualified to represent us in Austin. Why the fuck did you elect him as mayor to begin with?
I can't speak for anyone else, but I actually knew Ted Anderson from my childhood. We grew up in the same place and had the same values and culture, or so I thought. But as a teen he began hanging out with Leonard Wilson, who was also born and raised in this town. And Leonard and Simon Wilson's father founded this hospital and was one of the most powerful men in the town. My father was both a powerful man and one dedicated to serving the community. It seems my brother and Ted Anderson as adults craved power while not wanting to serve others, while I and Dr. Drake were the opposite. We made the mistake of assuming that my brother and Ted Anderson were like us because we had known them all our lives. We were wrong. My work schedule often became overloaded due to so many becoming ill because of contaminated drinking water. It affected the quality of our work at the hospital, even to the point of turning away a few patients that would die later of various causes. That is something I will regret to the end of my life. One of the reasons I so strongly supported Sandy Smith when she was mayor was that she fixed all the problems that were making people sick and injured. She repaired all the roads and the sewage treatment system. Everyone in the town began having easier and safer lives due to her.
Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict in this case?
We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to destroy public property, we find both Ted Anderson and Leonard Wilson guilty.
Thank you, members of the jury. Ted Anderson and Leonard Wilson, you are both hereby sentenced to 10 years in a state prison, and you will also be fined $100 million each to be paid to the many victims listed in the civil action filed against you by Sandy Smith. Of course, no amount of money can compensate the families of those who died in this case, but it is still fitting that your fortunes be wiped out considering how you got most of them. And so this case is concluded.
And with the corrupt town leaders sent to prison, Dr. Drake and his partners in defeating them were hailed as heroes. Drake even found himself a love partner, the ex-wife of one of those corrupt leaders. I was quite surprised when you were the first response to the ad I placed in the dating site. I mean, you are much older than me.
Ever since I was a teen, one of my goals in life was to settle down with a good Christian man and raise a family with him. So when I met Ted Anderson in high school, I thought he would be my perfect match. He also was a member of my church, So right after graduation we married, and a few years later our son George was born, and then our daughter Amy. Ted got himself elected mayor of this town, and George became a police officer here, and our daughter married a rich man and moved to Tennessee with him. And then everything went to hell once it was revealed that my husband and son were both criminals whose actions and policies ruined so many innocent lives. For a time, I considered rejecting Christianity and maybe even becoming an atheist like the ones Ted and George fought against. But then I saw your ad in which you wrote about your own Christian values, and you wanted someone who shared them. And now I am thinking I should be like you, because you opposed the corruption of Ted and George from the start, and that was indeed the right thing to do. So thanks to you, my faith has been renewed.
I'm glad I could help. I myself had to learn the hard way that being a true Christian is all about exposing hypocrites and abusers in your own religious community. As the Bible itself says, many false prophets have gone into the world. And to defeat the false ones, you must believe there's truth out there to find and learn from. Atheists like Sandy Smith and her friends and children have their own paths to follow, and since Jesus taught us to love our neighbors, without exception, we cannot think of people different from us as the enemy. Only God can judge them, not us.
I agree.
Dr. Drake died on August 10, 2061, shortly before his book, My Life as a Genuine Christian in a Small Texas Town, was published. It stands as his personal testimony to his faith. Such was his reputation that even many non-Christians in the town admired him for his principles.